Russia has ordered its troops to withdraw from the strategic city of Kherson in southern Ukraine. Kherson was the first major city to fall after the Russian invasion and was the only regional capital under Russian control. The move's been called a major setback for Moscow, with some analysts saying it could be a turning point in the war. Kyiv, however, is urging caution.
Russia's commander in Ukraine announces a retreat in a military briefing on state TV, arguing it is no longer possible to keep supplying the city.
This is a very difficult decision, but we will be saving the lives of our servicemen and the combat capability of our troops, which is necessary to stay on the right bank in a limited area.
Russian troops swept across southern Ukraine from annexed Crimea at the start of the war, seizing Kherson in early March. In recent weeks, Ukrainian forces have been closing in on the city, and Russia has been relocating tens of thousands of its residents. The streets of Kherson are now virtually empty. A Ukrainian takeover of the city would be seen as a significant blow to Russian President Vladimir Putin. Only weeks ago, he announced what he called the forever annexation of the Kherson region, along with 3 others, in a big ceremony in Moscow. On the streets of Kiev, some had their doubts about a Russian retreat.
I think this is Russia planning something. I can't really believe it. Why would they gather 40,000 soldiers there in the first place? I think they are preparing something for the Ukrainian army.
A feeling echoed by the country's president.
The enemy does not give us gifts, does not make gestures of goodwill. We fight for it all. We will move very carefully, without emotions, without unnecessary risk, to liberate all our land and minimize our losses.
Recapturing Kherson could allow Ukraine to win back more lost territory in southern areas, including Crimea, which Russia illegally seized in 2014.
Well, Mike Martin is a fellow of King's College London in the Department of War Studies. I asked him if this Russian announcement is to be believed.
We do believe the announcement. You wouldn't announce it on television at nation-state level. And actually, we've seen over the last month or so withdrawal of Russian forces. They've been blowing up some minor bridges to help them in the retreat. And they've also reinforced over the other side of the river. They've set up very big defensive lines. So we can definitely believe this.
Right. And so what does it tell us then about the way this war is going for Russia?
It is another, over the last 6 months, really, the tide has been going out for the Russians. The high watermark was really the beginning of April, where Russia, you'll remember, controlled territory north of Kyiv, up in the northeast in the Kharkiv region, Kherson in the south. Now, all of those 3 regions have been liberated or are shortly to be liberated by Ukraine. And so really the amount of territory controlled by Ukraine, if we take that as a metric of success, has gone up and up and up, and the amount controlled by Russia has gone down and down and down.
Why make this announcement on national television? Why not, if you're going to withdraw, just withdraw and keep it quiet?
I mean, that's a very good question. I suspect it's quite interesting that President Putin wasn't in the announcement. And so I suspect that because it's inevitable that Russia had to withdraw, and as I said, we've been seeing this happen over the last 6 weeks or 2 months. Getting the military to announce it in this kind of slightly weird briefing from the senior general to the defense minister, I think is a way of making it clear who's responsible for the retreat. And President Putin wants it to be clear that it's not him.
So what happens next then? Russia withdraws south from Kherson across the Dnipro River. Ukraine moves forwards and then what? Tries to press on with the momentum behind it while Russia does what? I
think we've got one more play before before winter sets in. And once winter sets in, everything's going to slow down. It becomes much more difficult to fight in somewhere like Ukraine. I think Ukraine has two options, really. One is to press forward, as you say, and take this particular piece of land on the right bank of the river. It will do that very, very slowly and very, very carefully, because inevitably Russia will have booby-trapped things and left stay-behind parties and all the rest of it. But Ukraine also has another option. If Russia's pulled out of this area, why not strike in another area of the country? And we've seen this actually consistently from Ukraine. They offer up an assault in one area and then they drive through an attack in another area. So I wouldn't be surprised if over the next 2 weeks or certainly before Christmas, we see an assault from the Ukrainians in another area.
Thank you for that. Very clear. Mike Martin from the Department of War Studies at King's College, London.
Thank you.
And we can get more from our correspondent Nick Connolly in Kyiv. Welcome, Nick. So we have this Russian national TV announcement while the Ukrainian president urges caution. What's your take?
Well, it's definitely very strange, as you mentioned there, this announcement on TV, especially if you compare it to Russia's other withdrawals earlier in the year, where often enough it was denied until basically it was too obvious for everyone, and then it was branded a goodwill gesture or a tactical retreat to find better, more easily defendable lines. So this is definitely a break in the strategy. Also, all the talk about wanting to save Russian soldiers' lives, wanting to kind of protect their own resources and their own manpower, that is also not something that really gels with what Russia's been doing elsewhere, where we've seen especially freshly mobilized people being basically thrown at the front lines with very little preparation, equipment, and huge losses there. So this all doesn't really stack up, and that's all kind of led to this huge kind of sense of disbelief here in Kiev and the kind of fear that this is a trap for Ukrainian forces. I think broadly, Russia is going to leave that west bank of the Dnipro River. It's just too exposed. It's too difficult to defend. It's too difficult to supply. The Ukrainian tactic of destroying the bridges, destroying the pontoon bridges, making it basically impossible for Russia to bring in enough ammunition and enough food for their garrison there, that is working. But I think there might be some surprises on the way, and there might be, as the Ukrainian secret services have said, some Russian special forces still left in Kherson to potentially draw in the Ukrainians into some kind of street battles, and definitely no clear pathway yet as to when Ukrainian forces will be in Kherson securely.
Right, so with those fears of a track, what do you think is likely to be the Ukrainian approach to retaking this region?
I think definitely it's going to take longer than lots of people, at least here in Kiev, would like to see. That's been kind of part of the kind of narrative here inside Ukraine for a long time. Pressure from the public to make faster gains, to push the Russians back faster. But the Ukrainian military command has been very resistant to that and has consistently kind of put a damper on those expectations and said that it's about basically fighting in a clever way without direct confrontations, kind of frontal attacks on the Russian lines, coming in from the sides, depriving them of resources, and basically making sure the Russians leave themselves rather than risking a direct kind of battle of soldiers having to kind of storm the Russian trenches, kind of First World War style. So I think it's going to take a good amount of time, but definitely it looks like the period of Russian control over Kherson, the Russian flags over the government buildings in Kherson, which was the first major gain that Russia made in this war, the most significant gain. It was the only regional capital that Russia has taken during this war. That is now definitely numbered.
And what is a Russian withdrawal likely to mean for people left in that region?
Well, there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, believed, of people from that region who have left, who've been, as the Russians say, evacuated, as the Ukrainians would say, deported to Russian-held territory on the other bank of the Dnipro River, some to Russian-annexed Crimea. So there's a big issue there of lots of the locals basically having no option of getting to Ukrainian-controlled territory and being put under pressure to go and leave their homes. So how these people are ever going to get home, how they're going to kind of reconnect with their families and friends, that is a major issue. But even if Ukrainian troops are able to get into Kherson without too much of a kind of city battle, there's still the kind of scenario of Russian forces on the other bank of the river shelling Kherson, because this is a very wide river, but it's still definitely within range of Russian artillery. And one local we spoke to basically basically over the last few months. He was saying his major kind of fear is just basically Mariupol-style kind of shelling of homes in Kherson, even if Ukrainian troops are back there, because the Russians are still going to be close by.
OK, thank you for that, Nick. Nick Connolly in Kyiv.